Right. As it is 17:30, I think I can start. Well, welcome everyone on webcam. It's kind of strange to talk with unknown persons, but it is on the other side nice to be able to be here at Miami University and talk. I am, as you might have guessed, a diplomat. That means, in other words, I'm not an expert on energy or energy-related matters. So my approach will not be a technical one, but I dare to say a much more political one. And obviously I will express my own views. I'm not here from Luxembourg side, but I think that was understood. So let me start with some basics to set the scene. Energy. We all know it is essential to life. It drives economies and sustains societies. Without energy, we would just not have a modern society. In our personal lives, for instance, nothing to cook with, nothing to use, our computers, a limited mobility without cars, trucks, or planes. It is so essential that the United Nations Agenda for Sustainable Development, adopted in 2015, cites energy as the 7th Sustainable Development Goal out of 17, and states to ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable modern energy for all by 2030. And energy security is, in its widest definition, which I found, according to the International Energy Agency, the reliable, uninterrupted, and affordable access to all fuel and energy sources. You'll all notice the similarities of the words used between energy and energy security. But if I take those two definitions together, it means, in fact, an entangled balance between various concepts. Reliability as a short-term physical equilibrium, adequacy, a long-term economic equilibrium, affordability, a social equilibrium, and sustainability, a long-term ecological equilibrium. Those are many factors to be considered together, but they all relate to the primary term, which is security, in its meaning protection from potential harm caused by others by restraining the freedom. Thus, one can easily grasp that policies relating to energy sector are linked to national sovereignty. Energy security is considered by many as national security. A few days before the start of the presidency of the EU, in July 2022, the Czech Prime Minister Petr Fiala stated in a speech that he wanted his country to become an energy sovereign state. And French President Emmanuel Macron recently outlined his vision for a European economic and industrial sovereignty, including energy, and I quote him, "A Europe that is powerful in the world, fully sovereign, free of its choices and in charge of its own destiny." Beyond these semantics, this reminds us that energy has always been an important geopolitical issue, contributing to the rise of powers, the formation of alliances, and even the outbreak of wars and conflicts. And as the Forbes magazine notes, every international order in modern history is based on an energy resource, from the age of coal and steel to the age of petroleum, and the importance of energy security. Recent years, as you know, has been characterized by a polycrisis. The intermingled interplay between COVID-19 pandemics, the war in Ukraine, the climate crisis, droughts and flooding, an energy crisis, and an economic crisis resulting from inflationary pressures ignited a cost of living crisis. And yet, is the energy crisis and the era of debate about energy security new? Not many of us will remember the first oil crisis in the 1970s. Yes, their characteristic was different than of those today. But still, if I look at them, in 1973, Arab oil producers imposed an embargo, causing all excuse me, causing oil prices, that was complicated, to quadruple. The economic effects of that included a galloping inflation, a stock market crash, and global recession. European countries were hit by social unrest and foreign policy tensions. More recently, in 2006 and 2009, Europe had to face unpredictable disruptions of Russian energy supplies. Russia has thus already used and will continue to use energy as a weapon, both in restricting access to oil and gas, or stopping electricity trade, as in May 2022, or worse, in targeting energy facilities, even nuclear plants, as recently demonstrated in Ukraine. So where do we stand? To understand the situation today, one has to look at the weight of Russia in the European energy landscape. In Europe, fossil fuel, and with that I mean gas and oil, represent approximately 65% of the final energy consumption. On top of that, electricity, which accounts for roughly 22% of the energy consumption, is largely generated from fossil fuel as well, mainly gas and coal. Though looking at the trends in recent years, one notes an increase in gas consumption as gas is considered within the energy transition as cleaner than oil and gas and coal, and more acceptable than other power generators such as nuclear. In terms of natural gas, the EU is the largest importer in the world, importing roughly 85% of its needs. The European economy was overly dependent on Russia. Until 2021, 41% of our imports came from Russia. The rest primarily from Norway, 24%, and Algeria, 11%. As of 2022, the share of Russian gas dropped to 25%. And this is, by the way, I'm looking here at the US, very much different from the US. The US is a net exporter of fossil fuels, and thus the impact on the economy is totally different from that of Europe. We could keep this in mind. In the last years, the European energy sector is evolving, and the clean energy transition is bringing about major structural changes. Different renewable energy sources like wind, air, solar, hydro have surged, driven by political commitments and a favorable policy environment in line with international climate change objectives. And not only the political commitments, but as well the cost reductions. In the trend that is set to continue and accelerated, while the so-called conventional power plants, coal, gas, nuclear, stagnate or in decline. So energy is to become more sustainable. And that is part as well, by the way, of energy security and sustainability. Adapted to specific energy demands and prepared for an increasingly interconnected and digital world. This being said, while the energy world of tomorrow will bring many opportunities, this transition towards more sustainability, more flexibility, more digitalization, all creates as well new security-related challenges. Electricity and gas networks are increasingly vulnerable to natural disasters and cyber attacks, while the growing share of renewable energy has to be safely integrated without threatening systems stability. Before turning more specifically to Luxembourg, I think I have to consider first the European setting. Two of the three original founding treaties, the 1951 treaty establishing the European Coal and Steel Community and the 1957 treaty establishing the European Atomic Energy Community, explicitly addresses energy. Yet for decades, energy was considered a too politically sensitive sector to be tackled at European level. The reasons were both practical and political. Energy markets are infrastructure dependent, and those infrastructures have traditionally been designed by the member states and constructed by them on a national base without cross-border connections. Furthermore, as already mentioned, the importance of energy in terms of national security meant that member states were politically reluctant to cede decision-making powers in the energy sector to the EU. But since the 2009 Lisbon Treaty, the paradigm has changed, largely due, as I told before, to geopolitical considerations. The EU now has a legal base for action concerning energy security. Article 194 of the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union sets energy security as one of the 4 objectives of the EU energy policy. While member states remain responsible for managing energy resources and choosing their own energy mix, or more precisely, as this Article 194 says, to determine the conditions for exploiting the energy resources, the choice between different energy sources, and the general structure of the energy supply, the aim of the European energy strategy is to achieve a triple objective: an integrated energy market, security of energy supply, and a sustainable energy sector. So the Energy Union strategy, adopted in 2015, has both internal and external dimension. As President of the Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, rightly stated at the time, we need to pool our resources, combine our infrastructures, and unite our negotiating powers vis-à-vis third countries. He actually meant Russia. We need to diversify our energy sources and reduce the high energy dependence of several of our member states. This is a broad definition of what vulnerability in terms of security means. Thus, I think it was a good response. One of the 5 dimensions of the EU strategy is called security, solidarity, and trust, diversifying Europe's source of energy and ensuring energy security through solidarity and cooperation between EU countries. Obviously, the objectives of the EU energy policies are larger, covering a broad range of topics, but they are formulated around the threefold goals, which I actually already mentioned: a more secure, a more sustainable, and more affordable energy system in the EU. But this is certainly not done as, and the term has emerged at a certain point for other things, as a fortress Europe. The EU is strongly attached to multilateral, rules-based, and with the member states, a vibrant supporter of an international framework for energy relations, as are, among others, I would say, the International Energy Agency and the Energy Charter, both being, since respectively 1974 and 1998, the multilateral structures for energy cooperation, promoting, again, energy security through open and competitive energy markets while respecting the principles of sustainable development and sovereignty of energy resources. So maybe you think I'm talking all the time about the same thing, but it is the core of it. From security to sustainability, in fact. Because with the European Green Deal, which is launched in December 2019, the EU main objective is to focus on achieving carbon neutrality, to fulfill the goals of the 2015 Paris Agreement on climate change, and provide clean energy to all. The Green Deal is a package of policy initiatives which aims to set the EU on the path to green transition, with the ultimate goal of reaching climate neutrality by 2015. It supports the transformation of the EU into a fair and prosperous society with a modern competitive economy. It underlines the need for a holistic and cross-sectoral approach in which all relevant policy areas contribute to the ultimate climate-related goal. So the package includes initiatives covering climate, environment, energy, transport, industry, agriculture, and sustainable finance, all of which are strongly interlinked, which is the other point I have to make on energy security. It is strongly interlinked with many other topics. But to sum it up in terms of energy security, I will again use a quote. And that quote is from Carrie Simmons, which is the actual Commissioner for Energy. And she states, "A green and clean system is the only way we can ensure our security in the future. energy security, economic security, and security from the impacts of our changing climate. The Fit for 55 package, that is a reference not, let's say, on training our bodies, but the 55 is a 55% reduction in greenhouse, which we want. That package was adopted thereafter, and it aims to translate the ambition of the Green Deal into law to revise, again, climate, energy, transport-related legislation, and to align the EU laws with the EU climate goals. But let me ask you to add that just proclaiming that the EU wants to become the first world climate neutral continent requires not only a governmental change of policies, but as well new business strategies and specifically as well consumer behaviors changes. And that takes a lot of energy, I might say. But according to recent surveys, because I was kind of looking into it, and I said, instead of then saying those are the measures which should be done, I was more looking at what is the impact of the citizens on it. Is there a response? Is there not a response to that question? And a recent survey shows that more than 70% of EU citizens expect the national governments and the EU to ramp up positive climate actions. And even 96% said that they would, on the individual basis, at least take one specific action to help reduce carbon emissions, be it recycling waste, reducing consumption, etc., etc. Energy security is thus not just a policy-related matter. It is, in fact, something which is including us all. But if you want to, that was 1920. The 1920s, we were fixed on that. And then came 1922. And 1922 is a little bit different. That's the new geopolitical and energy market realities, which called, in fact, us to drastically change even more and increase, and you will see in many of the speeches, the European independence, energy, especially in terms of energy, which is not surprising then that you will find a lot of politicians referring on this. But it was stated in it, it is independent from unreliable suppliers and volatile fossil fuels. So there are two broad issues which were put together: the supply and what we consume. But therefore, a plan was adopted. That plan is called Repower EU in May 2022, and it is in fact stated as a response to make Europe independent from Russian fossil fuel well before 2030, in light of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It sets out a series of measures to save energy, produce clean energy, and diversify energy supplies, thus reduce Europe's vulnerability and dependency, and fast forward the green transition, increasing the reliance on the EU-wide energy system. You might recall what I said at the beginning. The importance of geopolitics in energy security. But again, another survey. Came from one survey to another survey. But here I found 85% of European citizens agree that the EU has to reduce its dependency on Russian gas and oil as soon as possible to support Ukraine. So in other words, it has a broad-based alignment between the policymakers and those who have to follow those policies, which is another probably impact of what energy security means. But to summarize the European stand, I think one can say that within a decade, Europe has gone from, in fact, a simple concept of security of supply to a holistic and comprehensive European energy security concept, relying on a dynamic balance between the achievement of, you will remember, Europe is based on it, the internal market, so competitiveness. Economic will always dominate, but we had it, and that was the beginning, the security of supply. So we want to be more independent, and then the sustainability. or the transition towards a low carbon energy system. And last but not least, if I talk about Europe, I think one of the key roles of the EU is as well nowadays to encourage cross-border cooperation. You will remember as well that I said in the beginning, it was that the EU, the member states only wanted their own infrastructure. And here, there's a push in the last years to interconnect and to make energy flow more, if not freely. And you will see it, it's very concrete. It is stated, and I just love it. When there is for instance, no sun or wind to produce electricity, it is paramount for an EU country to be able to rely on imports of electricity produced in neighboring EU country. The same applies to gas. It's a quote which I found on one of the sites of the European Commission. But which means that maintaining the stable supply for all Europeans is not an easy task, given that, and that is historical again, the EU power grid is one of the largest and most complex systems in the world. As with gas pipelines, electricity grids are by now strongly interconnected across Europe and well beyond the EU. But that was not the case a couple of years ago. An outage in one of the countries might now trigger blackouts or shortages of supply in other areas and countries. It is the other side. If you're connected or interconnected together, it makes it that, and I was talking of the vulnerabilities before, but that makes it that, I mean, you just open up the risk of what it is. So to make the European system capable of dealing with possible disruptions, the EU is promoting just greater diversification of sources and supply. For instance, of having a wider choice of renewable energies and energy storage as possibilities. So that one fails, the other compensates. But that is not enough. What we call an adequate risk preparedness is vital to prevent or manage crisis situations so that member states are able to work together. So in terms of crisis management, to minimize the risk, good practices are being exchanged between EU institutions, the member states, and the industry on gas, electricity, oil, and nuclear sector to identify possible difficulties, take actions when needed, and draw lessons to enforce the preparedness in different scenarios and possible new crises. Point which I'm making here is again to say, I started with the governments. I added the public. I'm now adding as well the industries. So you see, it is not that easy. But as mentioned, the EU has committed itself to clean energy transition, contributing to fulfill the goals of the 2015 Paris Agreement on climate change and provide clean energy for all. To deliver on these commitments, the EU has set binding climate and energy targets. To ensure that these targets are met, EU legislation requires that each member state draft a 10-year national energy and climate plan, setting out how to reach its national targets. And this brings me very naturally to Luxembourg and how the country can respond to the above-mentioned challenges. Let me start by this. Being a landlocked country with little natural resources, Luxembourg is strongly embedded and dependent on its neighbors. When devising new Luxembourg's energy and climate policies, specific details of Luxembourg's situation and the energy consumption pattern needs to be taken into consideration. Among those is that Luxembourg is characterized by the highly dynamic demographic development of its population. I think not so long ago, we were just 400,000. We're now approaching the 650,000 mark, and it is set to continue that way. In addition, the very open Luxembourg economy is booming. And it's still booming, even in the crisis. And that is interesting. But that's the other side. It is also important to consider that Luxembourg is characterized by a high level of energy dependency. In fact, Luxembourg is the only country, or let's say, I'm going to say one of the few countries in the EU that does not have any natural occurring fossil resources and therefore has to import nearly all the energy it needs, whether oil or natural gas. Luxembourg also does not have any seaports, any refining capacities, any gas reservoirs, owing to lack of geology, and only limited storage capacity for oil products. Hence, Luxembourg only has limited possibilities to influence its energy security using national measures. Luxembourg does focus on diversifying the source and supply routes in order to guarantee its energy security. In addition, Luxembourg has always been a proponent of a well-functioning and competitive internal energy market and advocates European approaches to energy infrastructure. In, I think, 2 sentences, I just resume what I said before about the challenges of Europe. The current government went even further, and in its so-called coalition agreement, stated that we have to make every possible efforts to meet the Paris Agreement and to take into account the findings of the special report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It is one fact, while continuing to advocate at European level a policy of not promoting nuclear power, coal, fracking, or the capture and storage of carbon dioxide. There is a lot. But pursuing the request of the European level, Luxembourg adopted an integrated national energy and climate plan for the period 2021-2030 in May 2020, while an amended climate law, December 2020, established the legal basis for Luxembourg's climate policy, which is as well energy policy, by the way. The overarching objective stated that it is to adapt Luxembourg to the climate and environmental change challenges and guarantee the security and competitiveness of the national supply. Very recently, on April 17, the government presented a first draft on an update of this national energy and climate plan. In Luxembourg, it's called the Energie- und Klimaplan für Luxembourg. As was the case with the first version of the plan, the draft update is once again the subject of a public inquiry that invites citizens and all interested parties to submit their comments and proposals. It is for the moment, as you might have noticed, it's 17th of April, goes on, ongoing process. So theoretically, I should not talk about it, but I will still already preempt a little bit what the outcome might be. But it is stated in there, and I watched the press conference of 3 ministers at the time, that the national climate targets are already very ambitious in the 2020 version and are totally compatible with the EU targets. And so the government believes that there's no current need to further adapt. However, renewable energies and energy efficiency targets need to be strengthened to better fulfill the ambitions. The proposed targets for 2030 consist of a 55% reduction in greenhouse gas emission compared to 2005. That is already foreseen in the actual version of the plan and in the climate law. But then, an increase in the share of renewable energy for final consumption. The original plan was stating 25% and is now being augmented to 35% to 37%. And a 44% improvement in energy efficiency. The 2020 plan was foreseeing a range which was going from 40 to 44%. In total, and I'm not going to list them all, there are 197 different measures which are envisaged. If I start with that, I think we'll end by tomorrow morning at the earliest. But anyway, I tried to summarize them in a certain way. But because they correspond to a hell of a lot of different types of instruments, different types of stages of completion, different deadlines for their implementation, and various institutions or entities which are responsible for their implementation. But one can say that alongside energy efficiency measures to reduce this final energy consumption, a subsidy program, so financing for climate-friendly solution, the accent is strongly put on renewable energy measures. And here I see the imprint for energy security. They include upscaling renewable electricity production, in fact, basically by all means, wind, photovoltaic, biogas, biomass, hydro, which are those things which we can do here and which are very renewable here in this country as such. But as well, renewable heating and cooling. There you talk of geothermal heat pumps, district heatings, measures like this. And renewable energy in transport, the electromobility, the biofuels, and alternative fuels, which was added renewable hydrogen. And that is more for industry and what is called the hard to abate end users. So chemicals, industries, things like this. But this makes a real big package of what should be done. That is specifically for Luxembourg. Now, as I already mentioned, the regional level, the European Energy Union rightly encourages member states to coordinate and collaborate with their neighbors in the development and implementation of their respective energy policy. And here, as a founding member of so-called Pentalateral Energy Forum, which regroups Austria, Belgium, Germany, France, Luxembourg, Netherlands, with Switzerland as an observer. As a founding member of the North Seas Energy Cooperation, which encompasses Belgium, Denmark, France, Germany, Ireland, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, the European Commission, and the UK, as a member of the Benelux Union, Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, as well as the Green Growth Group, which is regrouping 14 countries, European countries, Luxembourg has various platforms to promote cross-border cooperation, both on energy-related matters and climate action issues. And I add, because I do not want to forget it, and I will not forget it, the Grande Région, which is important given the specificity of the region in its historic, political, sociological, and economic links that have been woven between the immediate neighbors. But let me go into a little bit more detail to explain what I meant by regional cooperation. So in 2005, the Pentalateral Energy Forum was created as an intergovernmental initiative. So not as a European embedded initiative, but it was taken on the basis by those governments which did it. The secretariat was provided by the Benelux General Secretariat. So the original three which had worked together. In the Pentalateral Forum, or the Penta as we call it, the Benelux countries simulate and stimulate networks of the future. Within this Penta Corporation, the three countries of the Benelux have taken the lead in discussion on planning of new interconnections in which is now known as the Central West Europe region. In a way, saying, but that goes too far from mere energy, but the European energy is to say, the goal is a European energy union. The way to it is to have various regional ensembles working together. It is easier in a certain way to connect them, and then afterwards make it that they all go together. The basis is the same principles. The way to get there is sometimes a little bit different. But for the last 18 years, public authorities and grid operators of the Pentalateral, all these countries which I was mentioning, have been working together to identify major interconnection projects. One example is, for instance, that it is more efficient now to have the electricity from northern Germany, which is producing through wind, things like this, that it goes through the Benelux, through France, to southern Germany. instead of going right through from northern to southern. But the interconnection is so well up that that shows a little bit Europe as well, that it is not always in your own country. And you will remember what I said before. It was so strongly just national connectors, and now you see exactly the opposite. It's becoming so internationally connected that it is both interesting and both much more vulnerable as such. So one thing is to build these interconnections, the other is to agree on how to use them. This is another flagship project of the so-called PANTAP, and is called the coupled market of the CVE region, Central West Europe region. And that means basically it's cooperation forum in consultation with all the stakeholders, which is then government, the grid operators, the operators, etc. from all parts. The rules of the game have been agreed upon on how, who is doing what, how, and when you can intervene. And these rules have become the model for the whole of Europe. So given the success of this cooperation, the initiative was taken in 2006 to create a gas platform as an intermediate regional step towards a single gas market in Europe, based on the same principles that this PANTAP cooperation. And obviously, the objective is to integrate the markets and maintain security of supply. But it didn't stop there. And the growing share of renewable energies these last years led to more themes in this cooperation. And that theme is flexibility. I talked a bit before, we talk again. It's just outlining what it is. Flexibility is not a kind of term in saying I need to be a little bit more open or whatever. It means very concrete things. And that is, you actually develop best practices in saying, well, there's one thing which is called demand management. Demand management is that you will, in fact, say that, how can I shift my energy consumption over time instead of just increasing production? In other words, can I produce during the night to have it for during the day? Brings me a lot of flexibility in the way I can handle my electricity when I come to peaks of energy. But it includes as well a short-term, what we call the short-term cross-border energy trading. You might be aware that actually energy is like financial services, is traded, and I buy, in fact, futures or not futures. But here is to say, when I have, or when I find myself, for instance, in inadequate wind production. Let's say today in Luxembourg, no wind, bad luck. I was hoping that I would have my wind resources. I need, on a very quick term, I need to be able to buy with electricity another market right next to me, because they produce, for instance, solar energy, or they have done hydro, and that's what it's called. But it's a complex matter of that market, and I wouldn't dwell too much into it. But the third of this flexibility is obviously storage, and storage of energy, of electricity, of hydrogen, etc., is one of the most complex matters which exists as well. And so, in fact, given that, at a certain point, to deepen even that cooperation, the Benelux Union launched in 2015 a Benelux Energy Expertise Network, which is seen as an interdisciplinary knowledge and expertise network, now regrouping some 50 expertise centers, clusters, research institutes, and public bodies as an exchange platform. The network gives the possibility to the actors to get in touch, to exchange expertise, to compare best practices, and propose innovative solutions. And I'm not finished yet, because I will add yet another layer on it. But this goes back to something totally different. It is acknowledging that security of supply and security, all in all, cannot be guaranteed alone by the public sector, but needs cooperation with various other stakeholders, foremost the industrial sector. The government recognized that the first role of public sector is to create the framework, in which joint projects in renewable energies can come into being, and then to support the private sector. In this context, I think the most visible example is probably North Sea, where since 2010, the coastal countries and the European Commission cooperate together within what was called at the beginning the North Seas Countries Offshore Grid Initiative, now rebranded North Seas Energies Corporation, to facilitate the coordinated development of offshore electricity within a public-private partnership. Very recently, on April 24, the second North Sea Summit in Ostend, Belgium, brought together the heads of state and government and the ministers of energy of Belgium, Denmark, Germany, Netherlands, Luxembourg, France, Ireland, Norway, and United Kingdom, as well as the President of the European Commission and the Commissioner for Energy. If the aim, I was saying it was the second, if the aim of the first one, which was last year in a more limited setting in Denmark, was to brand the North Sea as the green power plant of Europe, the second summit now was largely focused on energy security and the fight against climate change. Energy security is seen as the security of maintaining the lines against possible attacks. We have all witnessed what has happened in the Baltic Sea and North Sea too. So it was important to as well work on this one. Now, I think I made a large tour, which sometimes is a little bit boring because there's a lot of information which kind of comes all in between. So let me try to come to a conclusion. And I will start with that one. And I think you all guessed it. Energy security is a very complex issue. It brings together a variety of economic, geopolitical, ecological, and institutional factors. To further complicate the picture, it breaks down into multiple, either global, regional, national, subnational levels of power. In addition, one perspective on energy security depends on one's position in the energy supply chain. For producers, the most important part is security of demand for their energy resources. In other words, the security of revenues. In contrast, the consumers will focus on the security aspect of dependency and the risk of supply disruption. Energy security has to be reassessed on a daily basis as new challenges arise. A year ago, we didn't know that 2022 would be one of the stormiest years of energy in decades. Europe's biggest supplier a year ago is now one of the biggest threats to our energy security. Europe had disruptions in energy supply, but overcame them. Prices for energy are higher than we could, I didn't want to say ever imagine, because the sky is the limit there as well. But they have a definite impact on our societies and economies. But on a more positive note, since last year, there's a clear trend in the increase of clean energy technologies and new models have emerged. So how secure is our energy supply? Simply put, there are currently important challenges, but no immediate threat in terms of energy security. Over the last year, the European energy system has shown its resilience. Energy in its various forms flow where it is needed, and in particular where it is needed most. And EU leaders have underlined the importance of passing on with the ambition of becoming climate neutral by 2050. That did not change over the course of this last year. But that influences very strongly the public and private investments which can be made and new policy programs that would follow in the coming months. And it is as well a possibility to further improve energy security, as I defined it now here in the last half an hour, and coupled with the resilience of our societies. Let's just take the bigger picture, away from just simply energy And I will use an example. I will use one which is rather common here in Luxembourg, or which should be common in Luxembourg, because we talk a lot of buildings. And so I will talk of renovating buildings. But in renovating buildings, coupled with all what I said, we can have a combined benefit of reducing the energy consumption, which is then saving money for the consumers. That is one side. We reduce the greenhouse emissions, but we increase our energy security as well. While the other side is about creating jobs in the renovation side and stimulating economy, and specifically local economy. You see, it's interesting. But I know that my time is passing, and I have to stop somewhere. But I will not stop insisting still on two things, which are related to the topic. I mentioned one at the beginning, which is basically the whole of the topic of energy systems of the future. I was talking of digitalization, but I think digitalization will become the backbone of clean and green systems to make the grids more flexible, more resilient, the businesses and the homes smarter and more efficient. And I've stated that digitalization can bring a lot of benefits, but it will make the energy system more vulnerable. But if I would go into that topic, that would take me a couple of hours to explain it. So I will end on something else. Policy considerations cannot come, and I think I underlined them already, solely from the public sector. I am very much inspired that 2022 was as well the European Year of the Youth. And I would hope that each year could be the year of the youth. As regards energy transition, energy security, we need to give a voice to young people. Because only together can we be the architects of tomorrow's secure, affordable, sustainable, and resilient energy system. Well, and that's why I give now the floor to everyone who wants to ask questions or comments on what I just said. Thank you very much.
In what ways, from Sarah, in what ways can Europe conduct energy cooperation with the United States? Will it be predominantly LNG?
Thank you for the question. No, it's an interesting one. Yes, indeed, I was mentioning that we had to open up and be less vulnerable. So I think the precondition is to say, yes, there will be, and the increase is visible in the LNG, because it is one of the most easiest type of gas or type of energy to be transported over the ocean. But on the other side, I think that collaboration will essentially be that Europe will look at diversifying its sources of energies, and thus I think it will stabilize. We will continue, and I was mentioning the US is a net exporter. It will stabilize at a certain point, but I think the mistake which Europe did and learned bitter way of being too dependent on one source, that one will kind of be intermingled into trying to have much more sources of energies possible. Remember, when we talk of gas, we still talk of a fossil fuel. And that's why my prediction would be to say, well, it's renewable energies, which Europe is now working on and trying to make it that what is called the energy mix. Energy mix is from where do we import the part of fossil, a part of here, a part of there. That mix will be much more reasonable in the future, and thus, yes, we will need and we continue to need the United States as an energy supplier, but we want to be far less dependent.
Sarah says, Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts.
It's a pleasure.
I have a question. So you just said it again about the EU independence and specifically in energy security, maintaining and strengthening that independence from other nations. But at the same time, strengthening cross-border cooperation and strengthening the international framework. And are those competing goals, or is that going towards the same result in terms of strengthening the EU, I suppose?
The bit strengthening the EU is in fact a complex matter. The problem, and there I have to resort back to how is the EU constructed? It is not unlike the United States, can kind of countries which have decided in a confederal state to be together and to share everything together. Here it is building up something together, and that's why I tried to illustrate that it took already, and it's quick, in fact, 10 years. It took 10 years from just one idea, which was to just say, oh, we have a problem of supply, so let's do something about it, with the realization of that, to, let's say, a kind of comprehensive policy. And that's why Europe has always been a thing in making, and we continue. And that the same applies to strengthening. You have now calls by taking Emmanuel Macron, the French president, who said we need to strengthen European sovereignty in all respect. Yes, there is in a certain way wishful thinking, because and I'm more coming specifically to your question, because when I was talking of this pentalateral energy form, it took them 18 years, as I mentioned, to interconnect various grids, to show where are the problems. How can I manage to make it work? And it's still not, let's say, last or 2 years ago, we still had Belgium, which was saying by the end of winter, we'll have a definite problem. And then try and work it up. So strength is very much related to, in fact, the recognition that you have a problem. I mentioned already before, the problem being it was too easy, or the policy was too easy in just saying, oh, we have the Russian gas and oil, let's use it, to how can we now build up a system which takes care of each of the countries' thinking. The French, or take it for instance that the Portuguese and Spanish are much stronger in sun, so photovoltaic, because they have much more sun than Sweden, for instance. But Sweden might be much more advanced in hydro power or in biomass, or in whatever. So each country's, in fact, strength has to be put together as a collective strength. But that is Europe, and Europe needs time, in fact, in saying, well, I can put all these together, because that is the first step. In that I'm saying Spain has, for instance, a lot of sun or solar energy, then we need to transport it to the other side. And we know, because I didn't mention it, but we still know that the energy transport is one of the most complicated ones. You cannot just say, well, I have a gas line which is running here, so let's put hydrogen in that gas grid, because that would make it explode. So you have to figure. And that's why, sorry, my response is a little bit a strange one, in a certain sense, because in saying yes, obviously, but if we don't talk of let's build this up together, let's discover where our respective strengths are, because before we need to talk about it, it was kind of very normal that we had whatever oil, gas, other energies which we had, to now a new path, which is to say, well, if we want to transition to the 2015 climate agreements, Paris climate agreements, makes it that if you want to go down by 55% in the intake which you had until now, you have to build it up totally differently.
Thank you.
It was a long way of explaining, in fact. I was probably so comprehensive that there's no question possible. No, there is. I think that I should conclude in a certain way in saying the. In fact, basically, if you talk of security, or even European or globally speaking, energy security, there is not, I'd say, per se, just one definition. It's not like police security where you say, well, I sent 3 policemen out and then I have more security. Here's a mix of various initiatives which you want to make, and even with that, and I know I didn't say it enough, it's changing over time. That's my researching habit on a daily basis, is as well a hint to the fact that in 1970s, as I told, security was comparable to supply. Do I have enough oil? And if I have an embargo by the Arab states, I have no security per se of my things, which is now having changed nowadays, and that is when, let's say, new consideration is changing to what is my security? What is the mix which I want to make? More renewable, the more independence from all of the various sources of people, and that is, I think, as well changing as well the concept and making it difficult to explain what energy security is, and that's why I tried a little bit like the person's picture to kind of touch the various topics which are considered as energy security. But they're sometimes very difficult to link together, because in the perception of people, hey, that is not energy security. That is my changing of mentalities towards a little bit more being green or being there. While basically it is interlinked.
I have another
Right.
question quickly.
Yes.
I'm just curious what your comment would be on the relation of Luxembourg's energy usage and energy security in relation to just the high quantity of cross-national workers and how international the country is, and how that, if like transportation wise, if that has a large impact, or if it's just in fact that we're such a small country that it's inherently.
I think there's a couple of considerations here. If I look at it in a negative way, I would say, well, it's biasing our statistics. So in other words, fuel consumption or petrol consumption, per capita, we consume far too much as such. Or in the statistics where we consume far too much. Same goes for in fact we have, so the country is 650,000 now. We have a workforce of 400,000, which is pretty strange. Let's say in the setting, but we have to think regionally. So in fact, basically you're thinking of a region, and that's why the grand région is so important for us in working with that. But so the statistic would tell us your consumption much too high, or you're doing this. So in other words, that is a challenge of importing more gas. But on the other side, maybe I am critical, or I am kind of cynical vis-a-vis my own country, and I would say, yes, but that is bringing us resources. So in other words, wealth. And so why not use this wealth in saying that gives us the responsibility to do more in terms of energy? And I think that is exactly what, to be honest, and that's why you have this revised plan of the government, which then says, yes, well, let's take our responsibilities. Let's say we have, in fact, Luxembourg is small, so it's 1,000 square miles, which we have, but basically we have to think in terms of greater region. And so let's think in terms of a greater region, because the interactions which we have there, and let's not use our 1,000 square miles as a given, but let's use the fact that we're in a greater region, and let's calculate as greater region. Otherwise, Luxembourg would never achieve, or possible, or be wanting to achieve the targets which it wants to achieve. And that's why you see Luxembourg. What struck me a little bit in Luxembourg at a certain point was how many ministers are involved with, you take climate, but over the climate on everything which is related to that transformation. half the government is doing that, which is great and fantastic.
Great, thank you. That's very response.
But indeed, I didn't talk that much about the greater region, the importance of the greater region, the importance of actually combining, let's say, the thinking of it. You have, as a characteristic, you have that greater region. You have Luxembourg, which is a sovereign country, which can take sovereign decisions, while the others are all part of a state, be it that like the Germans, they are land with specific competences, or part Belgium, France. The decision making there is different than the one in Luxembourg. And so Luxembourg has there a certain lead in saying, lead and responsibility in saying, well, okay, fine, then we can together grasp these opportunities together, or this pitfalls or these challenges or whatever. But we can have it because it is in a way easier than to transform them into national legislation, or then to go to Europe and say we need a European settlement. In that sense. Well,
Thank you so much.
it was a pleasure. It's a pleasure to all listening in, although I didn't see you. I only saw a couple of people or some here, but it was a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
And thank you everybody. Sure.